Welcome to the X Factor. We're going to introduce you to Sean Hall very shortly. We're very excited to have everyone in the room today. Please make sure that you use the chat function. We'll talk more about that in a second. But first, I'm just going to hand over to Zrinka to just do a basic introduction. Over to you, Zrinka.
Thanks, Cookie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Huge thank you to Luke and Sean for hosting the session for the Great Place to Work clients today. Really hope you enjoy it. I'm going to leave you in Sean's and Luke's capable hands. Just one question. Do we need to get ready for a dance-off in the middle of the session?
I don't know if there's going to be a dance-off today, Zrinka, unless you want to get involved, you know?
No, I was going to go look for my leg warmers, but
okay.
If we're safe this time around.
We're totally safe. With Sean, we're never really safe, so I'm not really sure what's going to happen today. So.
That is true. But look, I hope everyone enjoys the session and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you. See you, Zrinka. So welcome everybody. The virtual world is definitely a space that us at FUNLOCKA have been playing for a long period of time now. We're up to 13 weeks around doing live and interactive workshops. We're connecting amazing talent to your businesses to improve the happiness and well-being of your people. There's just some of your talent. Guess what, Sean? We're up to 60 plus talent now. So we need to update that slide, bro.
We do.
Anyway, we can cover off all topic areas, etc. So please make sure that if you want to get in contact with any talent to launch themselves in the virtual space, then please let us know. Over to you, Shawnee.
Thanks so much, Cookie. Thanks for being my partner in crime again. Hi, everybody. Just a quick hello. I want to say kia ora and I want to say bula, just to acknowledge that where I come from, which is obviously from New Zealand, but then also my heritage, which is perhaps not so obvious, is that on my grandmother's side, she was actually Fijian. And so I've been thinking a lot, especially with what's going on in the world right now, about what my nana would want me to do. And then the other thing I would just want to recognize and just say Bujari Gamarua, which is good day in Gadigal, and just acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. Now, we have got a bit for you to go through today. So as I said, my name's Sean Hall. I'm the CEO of human performance company Energx. And what we really specialize in is creating what we call high capacity organizations. And we do that by enabling your people to take more responsibility for their personal experience. That's basically what our clients ask us to do, is help us get our people take more responsibility for their personal performance, for their well-being, productivity. Now, today, we're so excited to be here, and thanks for the intro, Zrinka. Today, we really want to focus on 4 things, and that really is acknowledging the context that we're in right now and going, well, how could we take a data-led approach to coming out better than we went in? And what does coming out better than we went in actually mean? Well, it means being more mentally well than we went in. It means being more productive than we went in, being more creative and innovative, and finally being more emotionally intelligent and inclusive that we went in. And so these are the 4 areas that we're really going to focus on today. Now, we're going to get you to get involved, and I'll let Cookie just explain to you how you can do that.
Yeah, so whenever we have a poll or an offer, now when we say offer, we're not trying to sell you anything today, but please make sure that you look below and have a look at the polls and offers down there, and also make sure that you keep the chat room vibey. Sean and I are very much about interactivity. We want to know that you're there. So please make sure that you keep that chat room going as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be asking you lots of questions. And so let's get started with our first poll. So what we'd love you to do right now is just to choose an answer from 1 to 7 that helps you complete this sentence. So over the last few months, I have felt mostly. Have you felt a 1? We've been in fear. 2's been stressed and anxious, frustrated, all the way through to peak performance and a flow. So over the last few months, how have you mostly felt? Pop your answer into the poll right now.
Shawnee, we're starting to see some of the answers, mate. And to tell you the truth, I fluctuate between all 7 of those in 1 hour periods. But most people who have been in survival mode, mate, about 44, 45%, frustrated and clear and confident are the other 2. But in survival mode is the winning one on the graph.
Yeah, great. And I think, Cookie and I have been doing these sessions now, as Cookie mentioned, 13 weeks, and we've really been seeing people's transition over this time as well, which you'll be glad to know is actually starting to move up that scale. All right, so you've shared where you're at. Now we want you to answer the same question again, but this time I want you to answer it from the perspective of what you've seen from the people that you're responsible for. So are they in the same place as you, or are they different? So just answer that poll for us now as well.
So I'm starting to see some of the answers come through. I was a bit late on the button pressing there, Sean, so I do apologise, mate. But yeah, in survival mode again. Stressed and anxious, though, is up there also. But yeah, about 60% at the moment are saying in survival mode.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Right. So what we want to really focus on today is, when we think about that idea of coming out of this better than we went in, it's really about how do we personally, and then also help our people get to clear and confident, get back to peak performance and into flow. So we're going to show you some insights that we've been collecting and give you an approach to actually really being able to do this. Like, I think what people are looking for as well is not just why, but how do we do it? What are the practical steps we can do to help our people get back to being at their best? Now, just as a bit of a background for me and why I'm here today. So I've got a bit of a diverse background. So my two biggest jobs that I had prior to launching Energx was I was head of brand strategy and marketing for Telstra, leading the brand transformation that you might remember, which you see on the screen here as well. And so that impacted about 16 million customers, about 80,000 employees and partners. And so that was my first big job, responsible essentially for a $9 billion brand. As part of that, I did a little bit of a career pivot towards my end of my time at Telstra, and I actually went into the HR team and spent a year as head of employee experience. And the reason that I did that, and I guess why I'm so passionate about this area, is that what I believe is that customer experience is a product of employee experience, right? So if we can focus on that employee experience path, we can deliver better customer outcomes. Now, since then, I've worked with all of these amazing brands, and so far we've assessed over 6,100 people around their well-being and then supported them with very practical ways to actually increase their capacity, increase their mental well-being, productivity, all of those aspects that we talk about when we think about personal performance. And so it's the insights from all this work and all these amazing organizations that we're really distilling into what we're presenting to you today. Now, and this is all in the context of this thing that's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or Industry 4.0, depending on what you've been reading. We've really got to think about how things are transforming and what's expected, what jobs look like in the future, and how do we move this? Because it's almost like there's the macro context of everything that we're going through right now. Now, one of the things I've been looking at, and I want you to use the chat for this again for me right now, is this is a little graph that I found on Google Trends just yesterday, right? So any guesses as to what is the one word that has seen this huge spike in Google Trends in terms of searches over this last little while? Pop that into
alcohol.
As alcohol came up? Okay.
Red wine. We'll have to see what people are saying in the chat room. So this is the Google searches. These are the latest. COVID-19, says James. COVID-19.
COVID-19. It's not COVID-19. What's the other word?
Lockdown. Working from home. Toilet paper, said Simon King.
I think that this is going to be the word of the year. It's like it's the word that every politician you've heard has been saying.
Engagement, sourdough, what? Baking, stress, corona, jobs, sleep, pivot.
Wow. Not quite there. Okay, the word is unprecedented.
What?
Right? Unprecedented. You've heard this over and over again from all of our politicians talking about all the unprecedented incidences that we've all been going through. Right? And when you think about it, we've been talking about change a lot prior to COVID, prior to the pandemics, prior to the fires and the floods, right? It's that we were going through this huge amount of change as we shifted into this fourth industrial revolution. You might have heard the acronym VUCA, for instance, as well being used around this. And so there's a lot of change going on, right? And the pace of that has really accelerated. If you think about how much change has happened in your organizations and personally, just in the last 3 months, it's extraordinary. So what does this mean for everyone here on this call here today, on this session today? It means that we have a real leadership moment, because what's going on is that all eyes are on HR. Right? And this is an opportunity for HR to really show that leadership. And what we would have seen is that depending on what's going on in your organization prior, is that you're either being asked more often what to do, what's the right solutions. And I think that what we have right now as well is that we have an opportunity to really think about how we come out of this. Right? We had less choices about how we went in. It sort of just happened to us. But today we want to really talk about how we take leadership and be in control of our own destiny as we come out of this. And HR is right at the center of this. It's a really important moment for HR to shine. Now, I'm going to ask you another question for the chat box. What types of intelligence are required for us to excel at this change? Right? What types of intelligence? So when you think about what do we need to know? What do we need to learn in order to come out of this better than we went in? I'd like to see you just write that into the chat right now.
Just waiting to see it, Sean. Just hold on a sec. Just seeing what creativity, emotional intelligence, EQ.
Yep.
EQ. Emotional well-being, EQ. Emotional, EQ. Yep. Resilience.
Awesome, right? All of these things are definitely that. And what we also see is that what the World Economic Forum is saying is we also need to start to think about these types of intelligence in terms of what jobs look like in the future, right? And so what we've got right now is this really laser focus on capability, right? What are these new skills that we need, these new types of intelligence that we need? And what's really unique, I guess, around the situation is that when you look at these skills on the screen right now, they're all very human skills, right? They're skills that the robots can't do, essentially. These are the things that we need to become increasingly competent at and increasingly consistent and effective in the way in which we do these things. Now, the reason I asked that last question is that actually, when you look at all of these, 7 of them actually have something, or 8 of them actually have something in common, right? When you look at the types of skills that they have. And what they all have in common is that they all have an aspect of creativity to them, right? And so we have to look at how we build this creative intelligence in us, which is essentially just about solving problems, right? And coming up with new ways of doing things. It's not always just about invention. It's about new ways of doing things. And when you think about it, no one ever got hired for a job or got given an opportunity or promotion if they said they were just going to do it the same way it's always been done, right? So we all really need to think about how we do that for ourselves and build that creative capability within our organizations too. Now, I've got another chat question for you. So when it comes to these things, managing our personal productivity, managing our mental health, being creative and innovative, like we've just talked about, and being inclusive, why do smart people do dumb things? I want you to write that answer in the chat box.
It's a question I ask myself every day, Sean.
Why do smart people do dumb things? Is that you're asking yourself, Cookie?
I always ask myself, everybody when I wake up, I go, why do I do the dumb things that I always do? Let's see what people say in the chat room. Let's see. Overcomplicate stuff. That is me. Habit. Lack of knowledge. Overwork. Burnout. Red wine. Yep. Yep. Panic. Moving too fast. Fear. Overthinking. Uneducated. Too rushed. Autopilot. Not clear on a goal. Follow the crowd. Mate, the wave.
The wave, right? I think maybe we're all personally relating to this, right? We go, yeah. What is it?
Tick.
We've done for ourselves, right? And this is the thing, is that what we're coming back to, this is a big question we've been asking ourselves, right? Because we're all adults at work, right? We're all smart people. Outside of work, we're managing mortgages and relationships and schools, all these sorts of things, but then come to work and sometimes we're making really dumb decisions, right, as smart people. And so we really think this comes back to is it comes back to people feeling or having a lack of capacity, right? So when we are stressed, when we're depleted, when we don't have the knowledge, as someone's pointed out there before, right? That these things are we're not doing healthy habits when we think about our mental well-being, right? That diminishes our capacity, right? And so we'll often be making these dumb decisions about not looking after ourselves. And so the big question we need to ask ourselves when we think about this big context of change is, do our people have the capacity to excel at change first, right? So we need to sort of come back. It's the same way if you think about what we're in right now is this massive sports tournament, right? And we all need to actually think about how do we increase our fitness so that we can excel in the tournament, right? Because right now our capacity is diminished, our fitness is back there. So it's a good question to be asking ourselves right now. Do our people have the capacity to excel at change? And so this is really at the heart of the assessments that we've been doing with over those 6,000 people. And so what I wanted to share with you today is especially just to drill down into, I guess, one segment of that data. And the reason I've done that is that what we've seen when you look at the reporting around the impact of COVID, we've seen that different parts of our communities have been impacted in different ways. Some have been impacted more significantly. And so today, one of those groups is actually women. And so I wanted to look a little bit deeper into what's going on with women in terms of how their capacity is being impacted. And we've seen this, I guess, at a macro context, just before I get right into the detail, is that when we think about those questions that we asked you right at the start of this, right, we asked you where you were at, right? And what you're seeing on the screen there is the results of all of these questions that we've asked in the sessions, right? So a lot of people being below that line that actually allows them to be at their creative and productive best. So let's drill down into what we're seeing in terms of women. So I want you right now to imagine that you're a 29-year-old female named Joanne, right? And so you probably know a lot of Joannes. There might be a lot of Joannes in your organization. So what we know right now is that Joanne wishes that she has more energy for things like exercising herself, hobbies, family, those types of things. She wishes she had more energy for that, but she currently only feels she has enough energy 47% of the time. And based on our assessment, she also has more than 7 on average burnout warning signs. And what do those burnout warning signs look and feel like, right? So imagine we're getting into Joanne's head here in terms of how she feels. Well, she's waking up, 84% of Joanne's, right, are waking up tired more than 6 out of 10 days. They're only taking time out for themselves, right, to really relax. And this is something that we see all the time where we're not valuing time out to recover. She often feels overwhelmed. She doesn't feel that she has enough energy for important relationships in her life. She's not exercising as much as she'd like, as we see. She's experiencing high negative self-talk, and you can see how this is all interrelated. And then finally, she's not feeling that she gets to use her strengths daily, right? And when we think about this, all of these feelings, all of these experiences and behaviors, right, or symptoms, I guess, in a way of, and warning signs of burnout actually are very heavy and depleting on people, right? They're affecting their personal performance. So that's Joanne. The other person I'd like to introduce you to is Tracy. So then we looked more at people or women that are in, I guess, in the age bracket where they'll be doing more senior roles. And we know that with a lot of our clients, retaining senior female talent is actually a real challenge. So why is that, right? And so what we know with Tracy is that what we see here is she wishes she had more energy for exercise as well, but then we see some slight changes, I guess, in the priorities in her life. But just like Joanne, she only feels she has enough energy 47% of the time. And she's experiencing, again, almost 7 of those burnout warning signs. Now, the burnout warning signs are just a little bit different. And this just shows how, even with generations, we can be experiencing different versions of the same thing. Right? So she also wakes up tired more than 6 out of 10 days, also isn't taking time out for herself, often feels overwhelmed as well. But here we start to see some slight nuances, right? So she's experiencing more negative self-talk than Joanne was. She also hasn't exercised as much as she'd like, doesn't feel she's enough energy for her relationships. And one of the really interesting ones that showed up that sort of surprised me is really about nutrition as well. Is that women in this age demographic are not looking after their nutrition as much as they'd like to either, right? So this gives us some real insights into what's diminishing people's capacity right now. And so that might ask us the question then, do the women in your organization have the capacity to be and feel successful? Because ultimately, this is exactly the goal that we want, right? If we think about what it means to be a great place to work, right? It's about those organizations that support us to have capacity to be and feel successful. All right, so one of the other ways that tools we wanted to give you was to look at what this means in terms of the business impacts, right? So this is a tool that you can use. You can either pop in the URL here, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. And this will take you to a tool that helps you work out the productivity cost to these things. So in terms of the people that are in your organization, and you can change the inputs in that depending on the type of cohort that you want to look at. So definitely have a look at that. The other thing when we talk about where this data has come from is it's come from these assessments that we do. And so we take a data-led approach to everything that we do to make sure that we're focusing in the right areas that have the biggest impact. And so you can take a free version of this just by going to bit.ly.mini-xiq there. And it'll also take you to a whole bunch of content as well. So that way you can get a feel for exactly how we take this approach, right? This is how we work out where are the right places to focus in order to help people build their capacity. All right, so we talked a bit about creativity before. We've talked about the fourth industrial revolution. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to think about when we are looking at what an organization needs to do is to really focus on the parts of the body, essentially, that are delivering the most value, right? So when you think about it, when you were hired, or the type of work that all of us do, the thing that was bought, essentially, is that we were bought our brains, right? Our organizations, our employers buy our brains. They buy smart people with smart brains that should be able to do smart things, right? They don't buy our biceps, as much as we might like that to be the scenario, right? They don't buy our brains. And so one of the things we need to think about as we move into the fourth industrial revolution is that this is where productivity starts, right? So our ability to light up our brain, to have that mental capacity to do the work that we're really proud of, starts here. So how do we light up our brain? And this is where we've been very, very, I guess, zero focused and continuously curious about the links between our mental well-being and our productivity. And what we're starting to see from research too is that although well-being, just intuitively we know this, is going to be a determinant of higher productivity, the ways in which we're pursuing productivity growth actually is undermining that, right? And we've seen that. And that's why we have these epidemics of burnout, mental health issues, disengagement, all of these things that are really impacting our organizations and impacting our people. The other thing that we know is an area to really laser focus on now is presenteeism, because what we're seeing is that 75% from the research of productivity losses are actually coming from there. People are there, but they're not there, if you know what I mean. So this is where we start to think about what does this look like in terms of the mental health continuum. So this is a piece of, this is one of my biggest learns, I guess, in focusing in these areas, is that often the dominant narrative around mental health is it's binary, like we're either mentally healthy or we're not. But what we know is that actually it's a spectrum, right? And we can move along the spectrum all the time, depending on what's going on in our organization. But what we need, if you look at the healthy and reacting ends, is we need new skills, right, to manage our mental well-being, to manage our mental health, so that we can do our best work, the work that we're proud of. And so it's really important as you think about how you're investing in your organization, that you're investing along the whole continuum, not just at one end. And often we see a lot of focus in the injury end around EAP, mental health first aid, those types of things, where it's almost, too late. Right, so let's focus again right down into why this is important, right? So one of my favorite friends at the moment is a guy called Professor David Allais, who's an expert in the neuroscience of creativity. And I went to David, first of all, to really understand what the impact of mental health was on the creative process, right? So how do anxiety and depression actually impact our mental well-being and our ability to be creative? And what he shared with me is this really interesting piece of education that I think we all should need to know if we want to learn how to light up our brains, and also to create a culture where our people can do that. And the first is knowing that your brain actually lights up in two different ways depending on what part of the creative process you're in. So the first network that we have is our executive attention network. Now this is really well developed in a lot of us because of the way that we've been educated is to focus on tasks, right? It's about convergent thinking, getting stuff done. But there is another network, which is the default mode network, which is actually underdeveloped in most of us. But this is where we get our divergent thinking, right? Our insights, our creativity, connecting the dots, right? Identifying things. This is also, when we're in this mode, it's also when we're at our most authentic, right? When we feel safe, right? Because for us to go into our default mode network, we need to be relaxed, stress-free, and safe, right? And this is where the impact of mental ill health actually can be crushing for creativity, because anxiety prevents us from going into our DMN, into our default mode network. And then the way that depression affects this is that essentially it affects our executive attention network, because we just simply don't have the energy to do the hard work. Often that convergent part of the creative process, turning those ideas into reality, is the hard stuff. And the important thing to recognize here is that these two networks, they can't be on at the same time, right? So it's our ability to manage this and understand how to create the right context, the right foundations for us to move between these two parts of the creative process. So it's a really important thing to think about. If innovation and creativity are an important part of your, I guess, your strategic plan, how do you create a culture where these two things can actually work in combination to get the best outcomes? So this is how it all fits together. All right, so today we've talked about all of those different aspects. So how can we be more mentally well? How can we be more productive? How can we be more creative and innovative? And how can we develop our emotional intelligence and inclusion as well? And so what we've seen from looking at all of these organizations we're working with is that it's all connected. But often what we're doing is we're approaching each of these elements, I guess, in a siloed fashion. Now, if you look at those little statements in between each of those four forces as well, what you'll see is, like, you start to think about what would it feel like if I could personally say those four things with confidence, say those four things consistently. Like, what would that feel like to me? But then what would that feel like if everybody around me in my organization was able to say those things as well? And so I guess what we want to put to you today is really to think about that the success of any of these investments in your organization is interrelated, right? So if we're not approaching them in an integrated way, essentially the chances of that returning, I guess, the levels of success or the objectives that you met are going to be diminished in some way. So really thinking about how we bring that together. All right, so going to get you to talk to us in the chat again. Now, when you think about that information that I just shared with you about how the neuroscience of creativity, for instance, how might, when we think about inclusion, focusing on unconscious bias actually be a barrier to innovation? I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this one. Right, so unconscious bias is often a default at the moment in terms of trying to create more inclusive cultures. But how might that, knowing how neuroscience works, right, how the brain works in terms of our different neural networks, how might focusing on that actually be a barrier to innovation? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Pop that in the chat now.
If you water weeds, the weeds grow, says David. Let's have a look at some of the other comments. I've got a question here for the end, but I can't. Here we go. Limiting creativity, narrow thinking, puts people into boxes. locks you in established ways of thinking. We are too guarded in our open flowing thought processes.
So who said that? Who said that one?
Cynthia Patterson.
So Cynthia, that you're very close there, right? So when we think about it, what we're asking people to do when we ask them to really address their unconscious biases, we're putting them into a version of fear in a way, right? We start to get people to be on edge and thinking about, okay, well, I need to keep second guessing myself, right? Rather than acknowledging, I guess, the hard wiring that we've got there. And so we need to think about that. If someone is constantly, and especially if we're trying to bring diverse people together, right, to actually work on solutions, if they're constantly thinking about their biases, they're not going to be able to go into that divergent part of the creative process. And so one of the things that we like to think about is how can we start to have, right, different ways of looking at inclusion or being inclusive than just looking at bias. And so a great way to think about this in terms of, I guess, the behaviors that we want to see by people is instead of just acknowledging my biases, actually what I want to do is be inspired by difference, right? I want to value difference, and those should be observable behaviors in people. I want to be curious about difference, right? Because what we also know from a positive psychology point of view is that strengths and behaviors like curiosity, about being brave, and asking the questions, even if we might get them wrong, about seeking perspectives, and about critical thinking. These are all creative strengths, and they're all different ways in to inclusion. So I just want to leave you with that as a thought as well. So we also talked about what this means, I guess, in a data-led approach in terms of identifying high potential talent, right? So when you think about what we've talked about here today, which is essentially about those forces of productivity, of mental well-being, of creativity, innovation, of emotional intelligence, and of inclusion, how do we, if you think about that as high potential talent, how do we actually identify that and measure that? And so what I want to share with you today is we've been looking into this to identify what might high potential talent look like when we think about the skills that we need for the future of work. And so what we've found is that X factor talent, we're calling them, have high capacity, right? So we shared with you before that what we do at Energx is we build high capacity organizations. So they have high capacity. And what we mean by this is they actually have 42% more energy than average. So imagine how much energy you've got right now, and if you had almost another half again, right? That provides a big performance advantage. So when we've looked at all of this data, what we saw is on average, most professionals only feel they have enough energy 5.2 days out of 10. But the top 20% feel they have enough energy 8.1 days. Right, so that's 3.4 extra days, or almost 5 extra days a fortnight of having enough energy, of feeling that you have enough energy to be at your best, right? So that becomes a massive performance advantage. It's almost like if you're on a 100-meter track, right, and the people in front of you are starting like more than halfway down the track already in front, right? They've already got a head start. The other thing when we think about this idea of creativity and innovation is that they have high innovation potential. And what we mean by that, the way that we're looking at this from a data-led perspective, is we're using positive psychology assessment. So as the pre-work for this, and also for our previous session that we did with you, we got you to do a positive psychology assessment that is developed by VIA Character, VIA standing for Values in Action. Now, more than 11 million people around the world have done that assessment, and we've personally assessed almost 3,000 people here. Now, what we know is that when we look at the creative behaviors that are identified in that assessment, that the top 10% of the market has an index score of 86 or above, right? The average is about 74.5, right? And so what we're able to do here when we think about those two sides of the X Factor framework is we go, if we've got high capacity and then we've got high intelligence around innovation and connecting creativity and inclusion together, right, that is a perfect scenario in terms of high potential talent. And so the question really is, where do you sit? How do you compare personally, but then also as an organization in terms of both capacity and your innovation potential? And that's what we're able to measure. The way that we've been doing this with organizations is is that we've been creating very simple programs, and this is where Cookie and I have actually been tag teaming a lot on this, is going, what are the skills that we need to help people actually improve their performance, to enable themselves to actually take more responsibility for that. And the way that we've done that is through a series of really interactive fun workshops, but then also supporting that with inspiration, right? So that people want to see other people that have done good, right? And learn those lessons from them as well. And so combining that with a whole bunch of amazing talents, we call them experts and legends, right, is a way that we've been working with organizations to actually achieve this. What we've seen as well, what we've also developed as well, is a way of helping embed that learning, right, and hold people accountable. Because this is one of the big values, I guess, of Energx, is that we believe everyone deserves a coach, right? And so how might we make coaching accessible to everybody? And so what we've developed is this world first in terms of behavior change. So a coach that works with you based on your personal context and then delivers to you a personal curriculum. And the other thing that we've thought about in this is what we've seen when we've talked to our clients is that our clients have told us they don't want another app, right? Can we just be where people already are? And we also know that, you know, people really only just use the apps that are on their home screen. They don't really want another one. So driving engagement, holding people accountable by having another app is not going to be the best way to do that. And so what we've been able to do is find a way through our technology partner to actually deliver this platform agnostically, right? So if you think about what you're already using in your organization to engage your people, or to as collaboration platforms or internal communications platforms, so things like Microsoft Teams, things like Slack, Workplace for Facebook, but then also personally, people are using things like Messenger as well, that we can deliver this curriculum wherever people are. And the way that we do that is lots of little micro learning experiences that put people directly into a challenge to embed that learning, right? And so that you're acknowledging that people just have a little bit of capacity at the moment. You're not asking them to spend a huge amount of time. And literally what we're talking about here is less than 10 minutes a fortnight to actually drive behavior change. And so we're really, really excited about this as an innovation. Now, what we know too is that when we invest in these micro skills, right, about building capacity, we can get results happening quite quickly. So here's a before and after scenario where at the start of the program, only 19% of the people that were involved had their capacity at 80% or higher. We're able to quadruple that in just 12 weeks, right? Again, just simple micro learning experiences that teach people sustainable skills. So big question for us right now is, I guess, is where we wanted to leave you today, right? Is that this is really a leadership moment, as we said, for HR at the moment. It's an opportunity to sort of step up and really look after our people, build trust in our people as they navigate all this uncertainty. And I think that's a big, I guess, a big question to be asking is around how do we create those cultures of trust, because we know trust drives high performance as well. The other reason that this is a leadership moment for all of us is that regardless of what's going on right now, what we know is that our people, our employees, are making some decisions right now. And they're saying, is this an organization that I want to continue to stay with after all of this is over? Right? That's a big question. How have they looked after me? What are the behaviors that I've felt from my leaders, from my organization overall? You know, and this is what's such a great link to Great Place to Work. Those great places to work are really caring for their people right now and actually saying, how can we come out of this better than we went in? And so what might that look like for you, right? Where we started, right, is I think there's 4 very ways to think about how that looks. So when we come out better than we went in, we're going to come out more mentally well than we went in. And as I said, we already had these crises around burnout, around anxiety, around depression. So this is a great opportunity to really take this time to focus on well-being and people's mental well-being. The second thing is, how do we help people with the skills that enable them to be more productive, right? To make decisions autonomously that mean that they're focusing on the highest value work, right? And they're ultimately doing things that they're proud of, the things that energize them and that are important. The third is looking at an understanding of the neuroscience and positive psychology aspects that relate to actually people being more creative and innovative, right? What do we need to do there? What skills do we need? What behaviors do we need? And then finally, the last link is how do we develop our emotional intelligence and be more inclusive out of this as well? Because we know that when we are feeling more safe, like when we feel inclusive, when we feel included, when we feel we belong, we're going to be more creative, we're going to be more innovative, we're going to be more brave. And one of my favorite quotes around linking this is actually from Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple, arguably the most creative company on the planet. And he says that inclusion inspires innovation. So how do we create that? So there's a lot that I've shared with you today. And I want to thank you so much for all of the insights, all the questions and answers that you've shared in the chat as well. And so now we've got some time really just to see if you've got any questions that have come up. But also what we just want to say is if you'd like a copy of these slides as well, please just pop a yes in the chat right now and we'll be sure to send that out to you. Also, if you've got any other questions about sort of the research behind all of this, obviously I didn't have time to go into every little thing that has influenced the design of those programs. We definitely can do that as well. So just pop a yes in there and we'll be in contact with you. So Cookie, I'm going to hand it back to you. What questions have you seen come through so far?
Yes, mate. So one question was from Danielle. What organisations do you see do mental wellness really well?
So it's a really good question, right? So one of, so for me, first of all, what does well look like, right? So for me, doing it well means that you actually have identifiable investment right across the mental health continuum that I shared before, right? So things which are preventative in nature around giving people sustainable skills, because we've never really been taught how to be well, right? All of the research that's coming around our mental well-being from a neuroscience and positive psychology aspect is all relatively new. So investment across the whole spectrum is the first thing. I would say of the clients that I've worked with so far that have really demonstrated that to me is a company called Intuit, who are a global software company. And I had one of my favorite clients working there. She's now moved on to Workday, but had demonstrated, I guess, that how we take this data-driven approach to actually design that as well. The other organizations that I think are starting to think about this are really those organizations where what their clients or customers are buying, they're buying brains, right? So if you think about the consultants and those types of things, those industries, where a client says, I want to buy brain, I want your brains, I want smart people, those are the ones as well that are really starting to take this very seriously.
Great. Jennifer asks, isn't energy also related to engagement, not just physical limitations?
100%, right? So I like to say, like for me, I guess the reason I use energy as well is I feel like when you're talking about energy, it's not a scary conversation around these things. And when we think about it, every single decision that we make, whether that's a conscious or unconscious decision, actually impacts our energy, right? And so I will say to my clients, we've got a choice in every moment, and that is we can either make a decision that is an energy vampire decision, which could be something like letting our inner critic beat us up. It could be about not sleeping enough, not nourishing ourselves, or we can choose an energist decision, which is about filling up our own cup. And as you've rightly pointed out there, like that's more than just the physical, right? It comes back to actually being proud of the work that I do, being inspired, feeling my work is meaningful, comes back to my relationships. And it comes back actually to those decisions that I make around choosing the things that energize me versus the things that don't.
Mate, well put. Last question was from Cynthia. Why can high potential talent so easily convert to a burned out candidate?
Can you say that again for me, mate? Sorry.
Why can high potential talent so easily convert to a burnout candidate?
Yeah. So I would definitely say that I can talk to you from a very personal perspective in this. The reason, and I know you can too, Cookie. And the reason I do what I do is I experienced quite severe burnout twice whilst I was at Telstra. And so what I would say is that I'd almost call myself high functioning at the time, right? And I loved my job so much. When you think about the two jobs I shared with you, they're awesome jobs, you know, to be able to run a $9 billion brand, and then to be in HR and actually helping design culture strategy for 40,000 people. Incredible jobs, incredible opportunities. I think what drove my behavior, my bad decisions, was perfectionism. I say I'm a reformed perfectionist. And then also I think I was a yes guy. And often we're putting other people's needs in front of our own, thinking that by putting our own needs first, that's selfish. When actually, when you think about it, we're in a much better place to be great people to the people we care about the most when we actually look after ourselves best first. And so we often give our worst energy to the people we care about the most. And so when I think about it too, it's also this, the research shows that highly intelligent people are more likely to burn out because they are making, it's all those little decisions that they're putting off in terms of sustaining themselves overall that are ultimately going to lead them to a point where they just can't do it anymore.
Mate, really well done today. That's it for the questions. We've got a final slide there.
I do. So if you've got any questions, as I said, so remember, if you want a copy of these slides, just pop a yes into the chat. Otherwise, you can get me on these details right here. Thank you so much for having us today. Thank you to Zorinka for inviting us along. Thanks, Cookie, for being my partner in crime.
I really enjoyed working with you. Every time I hear from you, mate, it just rekindles something else that I go, you know what, it's just another reminder. And that's the important thing, right? We need to make sure that we're continuously reminding ourselves and taking whatever we learn into our day-to-day. So Sean, thank you, mate, for everything. Please say thank you in the chat box for Sean. And again, thanks to Great Place to Work, like what Sean said, for allowing us to be able to present both of the webinars to you over the last few weeks. So thank you very much, everyone. See you later. Have a cracking day, and hopefully you now have your X Factor. Talk to you soon. See you later.